Just a reminder, you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abu Ni'mah here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman, and we're happy to be joined by a friend who we haven't seen for a little while and we've missed very much, Abdaljawad Omar. He is a Palestinian scholar and theorist who focuses on decolonization, the politics of resistance, and the Palestinian struggle. He is a lecturer at Birzeit University in the occupied West Bank. Abdaljawad, welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream. We have missed you very much.
Yeah.
I have missed you back, Ali and Nora.
Thank you very much. Of course, you have been very active. You write, you appear on programs, and you share your thoughts with the world. And we're looking forward to hearing some of them today. And let's start with the results of the US elections, which now seem like a million years ago, but they were only earlier this month.
Yeah.
In your reflection on the Democratic Party's loss in a recent piece you wrote for Mondoweiss, you write, what is perilous in this moment is not just the ease with which the Palestinian movement is raised up as a scapegoat for the Democrats' failings. It is the ominous reality that, rather than reckon with their unrestrained allegiance to Israel, the Democrats will choose to turn inward, punishing their own base for failing to heed the cries of the looming threat of Trump. And you add that this election defeat isn't just about Palestine, it's about how Palestine crystallizes a multitude of other failures. I'll also add that during the election, we were told that Kamala Harris was working tirelessly for a ceasefire in Gaza, and yet freed from the constraints of the campaign, the lame duck Biden-Harris administration has just vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire for the fourth time in a row. Of course, we could debate the value of such resolutions, but that's beside the point. They wouldn't even take the symbolic step of voting for it. But talk to us, Abdaljawad, about the ways you think the Democratic Party's full participation in the Gaza genocide, and which has now expanded to Lebanon, cost them the election. How do you explain their commitment and perhaps the commitment of other Western liberal parties? We could include in that the Labour Party in the UK, the Greens and the Social Democrats in Germany. How do you explain their commitment to genocide above all else, even putting support for this genocide before winning an election which the Democrats told us was about nothing less than saving American democracy from dictatorship and fascism?
Well, I mean, there's a multitude of, answers or approaches to answer your question. And one of them is, first and foremost, there's this kind of tension, at least, that we should place front and center in our analysis of how the Democrats dealt with the defeat. Because at one level, they want to discard that Palestine was an issue, because if they want to admit it publicly that it's an actual issue that needs to be tended to, that needs actually a shift in policy. So they have to keep it away or turn it into this kind of Muslim Arab issue that is only relevant to Michigan and what happened or unfolded with Arab voters or Muslim voters in Michigan. But at the same time, what happened almost immediately after the election results came through is that there's a lot of anger from a lot of liberals towards this whole issue of Palestine, which tells us something about, first of all, how Democrats saw themselves as culpable and also punishable by participating in this genocide, because they realize that it's morally indefensible and that it should perhaps cost them the election on one level. But the other level is that they're unable to really reckon with it as an issue that needs a shift or signals even a shift. I mean, Kamala Harris had a lot of opportunities to actually signal a shift in policy or do something that is completely different than Biden, or answer questions around Palestine in a different manner, in a different way, perhaps energizing and mobilizing some of its base, perhaps easing some of the concerns of a lot of people who play a big and important role in the mobilization on the ground for the Democrats, and who basically perhaps stayed at home in this election. But I think what's important as well is that Palestine refracts back as a constellation of other factors. If a wide base of supporters who asked repeatedly for policy to be changed, had their calls, reach deaf ears, why would they change any other policy? Why would they care about any other issue, whether it's inflation, whether it's the economy, whether it's healthcare, whether it's any other issue that could actually matter to the voters, in the United States more broadly, and for the Democratic base more specifically? So I think this whole joy campaign that Harris tried to lead, Palestine played a big role in how the loss came about. Again, not as a singular issue, not as a foreign policy issue, but as a policy, as an issue that crystallizes a lot of other failures, including inflation, including revealing to many voters the extent of the moral corruption and indistinction between Democrats and Trump. I mean, at the end of the day, Biden looked exactly like Trump in terms of their support, or both of them, their support for Israel and for the genocide that is going on in Gaza. So that played an important affective role. It played an important role in terms of how this election actually went or served the rise of Trump again. That's one level of the analysis. But to your question, I mean, why would they support Israel no matter what the cost? And this is what's the importance, I think, and centrality of Palestine, again, not as a cause for Palestinians, but as this kind of universal cause, because it tells us something about what Israel means to this global order that we live in, to capitalism and its structures, to ideological and psychic investments in this state that is called Israel. But they're all kind of tied together in this kind of condensed place that is called Palestine. And it tells us that there is a lot of elements that go into it, whether it's settler identifications, America being a settler state itself, feeling the sense of identity or identification with these new settler colonialists trying their luck in the Middle East, or whether it's the fear of the other, the Islamic other, the rise of a new Islamic or Arab empire in that region that could challenge Europe on some level, which with this long history of give and take between Europe and various Islamic and Arab empires that existed on the other side of the Mediterranean, or whether it is capitalism and its militarism and Israel's role in this kind of military-industrial complex that exists across the globe, or whether it's Germany's sense of guilt and redemption through allowing genocide to happen. What appears again and again is that Israel is situated in this kind of exceptional domain where it's untouched or should not be touched by policy concerns, by electoral politics, by democratic voices raising concerns or critiques. And all these critiques need to be shut down and even criminalized and placed on hold or not listened to. So it creates this kind of tension, and these tensions also lead to implosions, and that's what we saw happen with the Democrats. That's what we see also happening in other domains, at least when it comes to how Palestine both kind of is able to penetrate international institutions like the ICC, but how the discussion around Israel and Palestine when it comes to the ICC leads to American threats of invading the Netherlands, for example, or so you have all these multitude of issues that Palestine can actually crack and unravel for the world, and not only for Palestinians, but also for people living in the UK, for people living in Canada, for people living in the United States. They can see with their eyes, the type of class alliance that rules them, the type of ideology that this class alliance has, why this class alliance rather have Americans, pay the brunt of inflation rather than doing something about inflation other than pushing it on consumers and American citizens. It tells us something about the world we live in as a whole. And that's why, again, Palestine is not this kind of singular, faraway issue that relates to Palestinians only. And I think, yeah.
No, I wanted to jump in because I think that's an important point. We talked about it in a previous show, that the election, the role of Palestine in the election was not just about Palestine. And to make that make sense, I think of, I'm looking at this article that appears in the New York Times on the cover, and this is on Monday, November 25th, where it says that universities have cracked down very viciously on pro-Palestine activism, as we know. And it says that the crackdown seems to be working, and it's sort of a congratulatory article about how the repression, including arrests, police raids, draconian rules, emergency powers for university administrators, all sorts of things, are quote unquote working. Of course, the article does contain criticisms of this crackdown from the perspective of civil liberties or free speech. But then, in a sense, the last word is given to those they identify as Jewish students, who feel relieved because, they're not being faced with all this anti-Semitism on campus. So it's claimed. Of course, the article uncritically associates being Jewish with supporting Israel, which in itself is an anti-Semitic trope. But the point I want to get to here is this article makes no connection. It seems to be about, it's about what's happening in the universities. It doesn't mention the election. It doesn't mention the defeat of the Democrats. It doesn't mention Kamala Harris at all. But I wonder if there is a connection between this sort of crackdown on an entire generation, this demonization of an entire generation of university students, and they don't even ask the question as to whether this played any role in millions and millions and millions of people refusing to come out and vote for the Democrats, the people who would be their natural constituency. I just find it remarkable. And so, I mean, kind of as a follow-up, I want to ask you about your sitting in Palestine, doing this very thoughtful analysis and writing about it. Why are they incapable of doing this? Why are they incapable of understanding why they lost? And I'll just say to that, in all of the post-election analysis, and you'll find every crazy theory as to why the Democrats lost on the pages of the New York Times or Washington Post or MSNBC, and they will just remain completely silent about, let's call it, the genocide factor.
Well, I mean, if you're going to recognize it, what does it create? It creates a moment where policy has to change, no? I mean, then Palestine is good policy. It's not a burdensome policy. It doesn't lose you votes. It actually gains you votes. It's one that could actually energize their base, fold in a new generation and mobilize them and energize them. So if you're going to actually elevate it to a point of analysis that makes sense, then you have to actually deal with that fact and change your historical policy of being tied so intimately to this settler state in the Middle East called Israel. So I think that that's one element of it, Ali. Why they don't want to do it? Because I think Israel has a lot to do with, imperial ambitions of America. It has to do with, again, psychic political investments. Of course, there's the power of lobbies as well. And you all know, I mean, and I'm sure that throughout this year, we've been getting a lot of, talks by Mearsheimer and by different people who have different point of views of why Israel has such a hegemony over U.S. Foreign policy more broadly. But so you have this kind of imperial ambition in tension with a fact that is now coming to the fore, that Palestine is actually a policy that makes sense electorally, at least on some level, at least in terms of being morally consistent, at least in terms of actually creating a moral distinction between you and Trump, at least in terms of, you know, trying to create a different image, a direction in the minds of those who care most about Palestine, and who are not only the Arabs and Muslims of Michigan, but are, you know, a large swath of the electoral base, and a lot of the energetic, you know, people who were on the ground and who care deeply about this issue, and who see it as also a test, a moral test, a moral compass through which they can measure, you know, the willingness of the Democrats to actually truly change politics in the United States and the economy in a way that works for working class people and for people of color, etc. So I think that, you know, there's that problem, there's that tension, and I think for the Democrats, it's best to keep it under the rug and slowly but assuredly raise this whole issue of anti-Semitism to the fore that we have been repeatedly bombarded with, which works in different ways. No, it scares people off at one level. It also gives people who are hesitant or who actually have anti-Palestinian, you know, bias, or who hate Arabs and Muslims, a way to articulate their grievance against the Palestinian issue through this kind of lens of anti-Semitism. It gives people an excuse to remain silent as well, by fearing for their careers through this ability of the Zionist lobby to smear them with, you know, anti-Semitic remarks if they're going to stand for the truth of what's happening in Palestine. So anti-Semitism becomes this you know, catch-all phrase through which, you know, the Israeli Hasbara machine is working either to maintain silence, or to create controversy, or to kill personalities and you know, make them choke on their own words. And this is part of this politics of choking that we have been seeing quite, you know, viscerally in the United States, with many intellectuals, public figures unable to really take a stance when it comes to what's going on in Palestine and raising their voice in a way that matters. So, I mean, this is what we're going to see. I mean, and we're going to see what's happening in the universities also, you know, choking civil society. Now, I think there's a law being passed in the US Congress around civil society organizations also attempting to, you know, shrink the space for organizing around Palestine, organizing around, you know, backing the Palestinians' rights for self-determination, for a life of dignity, etc. So we're seeing also these kind of law warfare that is also unfolding in front of our eyes, which means increased criminalization, attempting as much as possible to keep Palestine under the rug. Although it has become in the past year so important and relevant, because what the past year has told us is that the hegemony of Israel over the imagination of the American people, over you know, the political outlook of many. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate and say most of the American society, etc., because, you know, at least those politically active, at least not only the progressive, but also from a large base of the population, who see what's happening in Palestine and simply cannot fathom how the Democrats are backing it with full force.
Aboud, shifting to what a Trump administration may mean for Palestinians and the broader region, you write in your Mondoweiss analysis that, quote, "There's something almost redemptive in witnessing Trump's ascent to the American presidency." What do you mean by that? And what does it tell us about where the Democratic Party has really situated itself as being, you know, like, for many people, I've been talking with so many people the past few weeks about, you know, since the Democrats lost, about how, you know, the Democrats maybe would like to be more of an opposition party than actually, you know, change any of their policies, listen to their constituents, and perhaps win an election. They would rather be the hashtag resistance. They would rather fundraise off of their loss, because they get the same policies that, you know, that they've, because Trump will enact the policies that the Democrats quietly really want. You know, this move, this very, like, you know, it's not even incremental. It's like it's like every 4 years you can see just how more right wing the Democratic Party becomes, the policies that it adopts, and the really, you know, the kind of cohesion between so-called Democratic values and the Republican Party, the Christian right-wing values. So what do you mean by the redemption in seeing Trump's return to the White House?
Well, I mean, when we were growing up in Palestine, I mean, when you had these cocky, arrogant foreign journalists coming into Palestine, like the Tom Friedmans of the world, and they would come and look at our leaders and say,
no relation, by the way. I just want to
no, I'm not. They would come in and accuse Arafat of being corrupt. I mean, I'm not saying that these accusations are not, but they would treat us with this kind of disdain and disregard, and talk up our leaders as buffoons, charlatans, as liars, as corrupt, as trade, whatever it is, and they do it in this kind of cocky, know-it-all manner. And I mean, yeah, there's a bit of revenge. I mean, it's a childish one. I mean, I'm not saying it's but it's a childish one, at least on my part, to see Trump rising in the U.S., to see this kind of populist, obscene figure who says contradictory things, who's in it for the money, who has no backbone to back what he really wants, but can rile up a base, populist. And to see America dancing to the tune of a figure that they once derided. So there's that kind of childish vengeful part of it. But I of course this comes with a sobering up afterwards, after that kind of childishness, sentimentality that I have, which is that Trump will be as worse, if not worse, than what Biden was. I mean, nobody's expecting Trump to come with policies that would actually end the war. Nobody's really hopeful that of course Trump is spoken about as this kind of unpredictable figure that we don't know what he will do. Also a figure that is less beholden to Netanyahu on a personal level. He has his own megalomaniac type of personality and his own ego, and Netanyahu has his own ego, and they might clash. And so there's all these theories going on how Trump could also be less of a weak figure like Biden was when it came to dealing with the prime minister in Israel. But I think this kind of interpersonal dynamics are not as important as what sets this kind of unified policy in the United States when it comes to Israel, in the foreign policy and intelligence community, and in the managers of the empire more broadly. And I think that's what will be the driving force behind any policy. While personalities matter, it's still gonna be this direction, which is to back Israel, to give it as much space, to give it diplomatic cover, legal cover, and help it achieve whatever it says it wants to achieve in its war in Gaza. So I don't think that changes from Trump to Biden in any radically different way, except that with Trump, we wouldn't see this kind of rhetorical maneuvering around a lot of the policies that Trump will support and back up.
And the Trump administration is not going to pretend to care about Palestinians while starving and bombing them the way the Democrats do. That's for sure. You talked about your own reaction personally. You even called it emotional or childish. But I think it's a reaction that has been shared by many people, and which is that, even knowing that what comes next is not better, I don't want to say worse, because I don't know how there can be worse than what has been done. And to say, oh, Trump will be worse is in a way a kind of whitewashing of the horror that has happened for 14 months and is happening now as we're speaking. And I don't think, I've said I don't think Trump has magic bombs, which Biden doesn't have, and to say Trump will be worse is to suggest that Biden has held Israel back in any meaningful way, which we know is not the case. So I get what you're saying, but I just want to add that comment to it. But my question is, I mean, so I think there's a moral reaction in. So what I'm saying is, I think there's a moral reaction in being satisfied that they're lost, because, as John Mearsheimer put it, genocide is a red line. He wouldn't vote for them because genocide is a red line. My question is what's the reaction you're seeing more broadly among Palestinians? And maybe, maybe the right answer is that the US is not the center of the world, so maybe they don't care that much. But on the other hand, the US is a major factor in this genocide. What's the reaction? And thinking regionally, there's some ideas I've heard, and we're in the realm of speculation, where, Trump had this very sort of special relationship, let's say, with the Gulf regimes through the Abraham Accords. And there was no hiding that all of the Gulf regimes, including Saudi Arabia, wanted to join up to the Abraham Accords, wanted to complete the normalization, but now feel they can't because of the genocide. And they have had to sort of draw lines that say no normalization until there's a Palestinian state, or whatever conditions they're putting. So talk about how you see, without getting into, because as we say, Trump or Biden, it's two sides of the same coin. But in terms of the regional dynamics and the reactions among Palestinians, is there a difference? Do people perceive a difference?
Well, I think on a popular level, no. I mean, I think people don't really care about who comes in, whether it's Biden or Trump. Specifically, among Palestinians more broadly, the way we look at American politics is not much different than the way we look at Israeli politics, which is whether it's, Ben Gvir or Netanyahu or Gantz, they all look the same to us. From our perspective, from our point of view, they all build settlements, they all want to kill us, they all want to eliminate us, they all have a desire to eradicate Palestinian presence physically, symbolically, politically. So from that vintage point, looking at American politics, I mean, nobody really gives that much of a damn about American politics or who comes in. I mean, some people might watch it out of just an interest, like watching a sports or watching soccer or football or whatever, but other than that, that's not really important. But of course, some people do argue that there is these kind of minute differences, and we should take them seriously, because one would back more of a right-wing agenda, one would give Israel more of a moral grounding and support its policies in a much more voice-first way. I mean, the Israelis were happy about Trump, specifically the current government, its right-wing coalition, including Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and they wanted Trump to come in. So they see they see the right wing in America as their ideological ally, as their kind of politics that they want to see as well, and the kind of president they want to see backing them up in the White House. But as you said, there is also this kind of Trumpian Saudi relationship, which is being hyped up as also important for Trump himself and his business interest, including, talks about his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who is also, outspoken Zionist and a friend of Netanyahu's family, who's, getting a lot of investment money funds from Gulf countries and, playing with this money around. So, there's all of these factors that come into who will Trump listen to on the direction of war. Will it be the Gulf countries and their interests being placed first, or Netanyahu and his clique of friends that will be placed front and center in terms of the direction of the war and how it will proceed? And this is not to say that the Gulf countries necessarily would be totally opposed to the war being, continued, or that they would be forceful in terms of stopping the war. But there might be different priorities among the different allies America has in the region. And, the theory is that Trump will be more receptive to the Saudi rather than the Netanyahu, priorities. That's the idea. And that could backfire in the face of Israel's right wing, which wagered its wage on, Trump coming into the presidency, allowing settlements to come back to Gaza. That's the hope. Perhaps allowing for an ethnic cleansing campaign. Perhaps pressuring Trump to pressure the Arabs to, open the floodgates of people being forcibly removed from the West Bank and Gaza. So this is all part of the agenda for at least the next year. And that's part of at least what the right wing in Israel will want to see, because they still speak of this kind of decisive plan to end the Palestinian issue. And a decisive plan to end the Palestinian issue means ending the Palestinian people. No less than that, because even if you return settlements to the Gaza Strip, it only changes the type of colonialism you have. Nothing more or nothing less. It doesn't really change the fact that there's going to be an ongoing struggle, ongoing resistance to these settlements. It doesn't change the fact that, you're still entangled, or you have settlements with a population of Palestinians. But if you want to decisively end the Palestinian cause, you'll have to decisively end, the Palestinian people, which is an impossible task, of course. But that has been the rhetoric that, Israel has been spewing since the beginning of this war, and has tried to follow up through its genocidal policies in Gaza, and flirting with that possibility in the West Bank, and also exercising a lot of power in the South, in South Lebanon as well.
Abdaljawad, in a recent essay, you introduce a play on the concept of shock and awe, which was, of course, the U.S. military doctrine that calls for overwhelming force to overpower and confuse an adversary. This is the doctrine, as we all know, that the U.S. used when it launched its aggression against Iraq in 2003, except you talk about shock without awe. You write, quote, "This shock without awe paradigm continues to serve Israel as it flirts with dangerous fascist ideologies and takes a festive and unapologetic pleasure in its power to punish, kill, maim, and destroy." Can you talk more about that, what you mean by shock without awe, and how it helps us, really understand Israel's deepest strategies and goals, long-term and short-term?
Well, I mean, I don't think it explains strategies, but what it explains is, something about the Israeli psyche, what happened on October 7th, which is this kind of crack and void that opened up in Israel's own self-understanding at this kind of invulnerable power in the Middle East that nobody would dare to challenge. And now the Palestinian resistance, small in the Gaza besieged, could conduct this kind of operation that defeats its, southern command, and expose its army to be weak and fragile and vulnerable in a way that, shocked Israel, and also, in many ways produced this effect of awe, and that was a success of at least the Palestinian resistance in these first couple of days. And Israel has prided itself not only on being a refuge for Jewish refugees coming out of Europe and arriving to Palestine as settlers, but has prided itself not only in the security that can provide those people that are willing to participate in the settler colonial project, but it has prided itself with the ability to exercise military power, and it's built its identity around military power. In fact, one of the earliest readings of what happened on October 7th, I mean, New York Times was doing this article, I forgot exactly when, but this Jewish Israeli novelist writes that on October 7th we stopped being Israeli and we returned to being Jewish. And what he meant, or what they actually were saying, is that we stopped being powerful and now we return to being vulnerable. And it tells us something also about this relationship between Zionism and Judaism, where the real traumatic encounter for Zionists is with the Jew. It's not with Hamas. It's not with the Palestinians. It's with this idea of the Jew, hearkening back to it. And Israel has invested quite a lot historically in building these, military operations that not only have tactical effect, but would actually render their enemies not only in a state of shock, but also would create or produce this effect of an amazing or awesomeness of power and its display. And what we have been seeing for the past year is that it lost much of that capacity, although with a qualification to some degree, maybe with what they have been able to achieve in some of the operations against Hezbollah. One could claim that there is this kind of combination of both, and not all of these operations. But in essence, they haven't been really able to show this kind of heroic Israeli figure. Yeah.
Even in the case of the operations against Hezbollah, you may be referring to the pagers, the pager attack, of course, the assassinations, which would have required the type of mythical intelligence that we grew up hearing, that Israel has this mythical omniscient intelligence ability. But even when they achieved that shock and awe, okay, now I think I'm getting it in real time. There was shock, but no awe, in the sense that within days, people recovered from that sense of shock, and it didn't produce the kind of, you think about how the hubris in the West, in the United States, following the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, that now Lebanon is going to fall into line, the whole Middle East is going to be remade, and that's not what happened. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to Ali, I'm not trying to really speak about strategic or political level on what changes and doesn't, but only at the aesthetic level of military operations, because they play this kind of role in like Israeli self-assertion. Like it's kind of a paradigm where there's an impossible task, and we, the Israelis, have the ability to overcome this impossibility. And this is basically part of the brand. This is actually a large part of how Israel has been able to also attract the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora. This small state in the Middle East fighting against all these monstrous Arabs and defying them, and creating that kind of narrative around its military power and around the aesthetic effects of its military power. So there's that element to it. I mean, of course, we can discuss to what extent Israel's operation actually incur an effect. But what I think is central here is that since October 7th, what we have seen largely, what you said, is shock without awe, is the ability to create this kind of hellscape that is called Gaza today, where genocide is taking place, is the logic of punishment being enacted in Lebanon. And to be honest, when people are looking at this, they're making the contrast between a fighter leader like Yahya Sinwar, who fights for the last moment, who's willing to die for the cause, and Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's a liar and whose son lives in Miami. I mean, they're making that contrast quite alone. I mean, even if you have no real investment in this whole issue and know nothing about it, if you're coming to Mars from Mars and you're looking at this, you'll be more impressed with what the Palestinians have been able to do with their meager resources, with their siege, defying an empire, defying a settler state, and defying an empire behind it, and at the same against an Israeli political class that is cowardly. When Prime Minister Netanyahu's house was targeted, the first thing he asked for is more protection and millions of shekel being spent on his house to protect him and his wife. That's the contrast between the heroic nature of and the heroic narrative that Palestinians can produce, as opposed to an Israeli narrative where machines reign and where they fight a post-heroic fight where they seldom have heroes. And and that plays a role. It plays a role in narrative buildup, in people's the way they look at this issue. If you want to talk about the political effects of it, but of course, on your
there
point,
are no Israeli heroes now.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
I mean, there might be some here and there, but mean, that's what I'm
But
trying to say.
if you take someone like, okay, you refer to, when we say Netanyahu, we talk about one person, but we talk about Benjamin Netanyahu, but there is the mythical figure of his brother, Yonatan Netanyahu, who died in the Entebbe operation in 1970, I think 5 or 6 or 7. Which I think that operation where the Israeli commandos led by Yonatan Netanyahu, the brother of Benjamin Netanyahu, rescuing passengers from a hijacked plane in Entebbe in Uganda, played a disproportionate role in building up that mythical image of Israel as this invincible state that is capable of doing the impossible with very few resources. And the hero figure in that is the brother of Netanyahu, and it was partly on the reputation of his dead brother that Benjamin Netanyahu built up his political career. And, Netanyahu is this just despicable, cowardly, as you say, figure. His son is a coward living in a high-rise apartment building in Miami, being protected at taxpayer expense, Israeli taxpayer expense, maybe even American taxpayer expense too. But there is no Yonatan Netanyahu, even within the terms of Israeli mythology today, or Zionist mythology. I can't think of any quote unquote heroic figure today.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's, they can't produce it because on one level they depend on machines. The second level, I mean, even if you go back to Sinwar's last stance, I mean, you had this injured fighter without a weapon and they choose to kill him. Although it turned out to be a leader who can bring them a trove of intelligence about the whereabouts of perhaps, Israeli captives, about, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, about the military infrastructure. But they chose to kill him instead of facing him or risking their soldiers. I mean, and that's and of course it has to do with also the way in which they deal with killing now in Gaza, which is at ease. I mean, there's no real restrictions or limitations on the use of power as well, or it's unleashing. So there are these two components going into it. But yeah, I mean, there's no real heroic figure. I mean, this is a post-heroic society that is fighting a war and using the machines to, enact this massive form of violence, and thinking itself that it will not have repercussions on itself or its society for, committing genocide. So that's the reality of how this all comes across for people who are at least slightly attuned to what's going on in Palestine or Lebanon at this particular moment.
Well, finally, it's been almost 14 months since the resistance operation of October 7th, 2023, and the start of the Israeli genocide. Last week, the International Criminal Court belatedly, of course, took them 6 months, issued the arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. That put Israel's allies, the Western countries that preach the loudest about international law and justice and the rules-based international order, in an awkward position, whether to completely ditch the pretense of a commitment to international law or to announce that they will implement the arrest warrants. There's understandably a lot of skepticism about the value of international law, given how it has utterly failed the Palestinian people, not just in the last 14 months, but in the last 76 years. Were you surprised that these warrants were finally issued? And do you think that this creates an unbearable contradiction for the US-led Western liberal order, which proclaims itself, of course, the protector of international law, the arbiter of human rights, while being the most destructive forces against them?
I mean, I think, first of all, I would say that, the way Palestinians look at international law is no different than the way that, there's a large skepticism around it. No? I mean, growing up, Palestinians hate courts. I mean, and I think we all universally share a dislike of lawyers. but courts is also something that Palestinians go to interrogation rooms, they face their interrogator, then they go to a court where there's a military judge who's in cahoots with the intelligence officer and the interrogator, and there's no real justice. I mean, we've never seen a court that actually have been fair or just when it comes to the Palestinian people, their everyday experience under occupation, and therefore there's this kind of innate, inbred, if you want, hatred of law and courts, and also a sharing this dislike of lawyers. And there's a lot of skepticism around ICC, around what it means to go to the ICJ and get some sort of judgment on genocide. Of course, there are Palestinians who argue these symbolic moves are important. You can push your own message through these kind of court decisions. You can codify that your narrative has real, tangible, neutral observer, mechanism that actually says, oh, there's a genocide happening. But it also kind of harkens back to our feeling that, why doesn't the world believe us when we say that there's a genocide? Why they don't believe us when we say that, Ben Gvir wants to get rid of us and kill us and eliminate our presence? I mean, it harkens back to these kind of, why. I mean, this is nothing against, for instance, people like Ilan Pappé, but why they need Ilan Pappé to tell them that there was a Nakba or there was an ethnic cleansing campaign that happened in 1948? We've always said that this is what happened to us. So there's always this kind of also level of it that, as if we need these kind of international forums to codify and validate and give power to our message. But to your question, at least the last part of it, yes, I think it does create this unbearable type of implosion, and we're seeing some of I think the court's decision is in large part the result of Israel's unwillingness to investigate itself, even in a decorative stance, and this helped push, because I think the ICC, if Israel did some sort of investigations around what happened in terms of just formalic and performative investigations, they would have probably chosen not to issue these arrest warrants. But it was pushed to issue these warrants because it had no excuse not to do so. And once it reached that, it's trying to lift the burden or shift the burden now on the member state countries, telling them you can exercise this arrest warrant, you have to, or you can start to negotiate amongst yourselves what you're going to do and how you're going to play around this and not enact it, and how you're going to still respect the ICC and the international legal mechanisms it represents and the international liberal order, or will you betray that and try to navigate it in a different way? And again, this is another example of how Palestine manages to create these sites of implosions. I mean, and where people choke on their own words and contradictions seem unbearable, and where policies cannot be consistent, and where moral integrity of institutions and peoples and governments seem to totally break down or sound completely hypocritical in many ways. So yeah.
Well, we could talk to you, as always. We could talk to you for hours and hours, and we will have you back on a lot sooner than I don't even know. It was like 5 months that we had you on last. So, Abdaljawad, you are an incredible analyst, and I am encouraging all of our viewers and listeners to read your most recent pieces on Mondoweiss, and also your radicalphilosophy.com. That's where your Shock Without Awe essay came out. As always, thank you so much. And we look forward to having you back on very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very thought-provoking, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of think about these things in the terms you talk about them, which really helps us to understand things, to understand the incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Noura. I'm always happy to come on and be with you, and keep the good work going.
Thank you. You too.